Picture this. You buy a rustic, sun-drenched farm on the Spanish island of Mallorca. You spend your mornings strolling through ancient stone terraces, surrounded by the deep blue of the Mediterranean Sea. You pluck tiny, emerald-green caper buds from beautiful trailing vines, sell them to local Michelin-starred chefs, and spend the rest of your day sipping wine on the veranda. It is the ultimate European retirement dream. A carefree island life, funded by a gourmet agricultural product. But here is the reality. That dream is a brutal, exhausting battle against rocky soil, unpredictable droughts, and soaring labor costs that will eat your profit margins alive. You are about to discover that owning a caper farm in the Balearic Islands is not the agricultural business of growing a simple garnish. It is actually the business of luxury heritage branding and high-stakes microclimate management. To survive in this industry, you have to understand that not all capers are created or sold equally. The caper market in the Balearic Islands is divided into 4 very distinct business models, and choosing the wrong one will bankrupt you. First, we have the bulk wholesale model. This involves harvesting raw, unprocessed caper buds in massive quantities and selling them to large Spanish mainland processors. The revenue structure here is based purely on volume, but the margins are razor thin. You are competing directly with massive industrial farms in North Africa and the Middle East, where labor costs are a fraction of yours. Second, there is the artisanal direct-to-consumer model. In this segment, you are not just a farmer, you are an artisan. You hand-pick the capers, cure them slowly in local sea salt or artisanal vinegar on your own property, and package them in beautiful glass jars. You sell directly at high-end farmers markets in Ibiza or Mallorca, or online to wealthy expatriates and food enthusiasts. The volume is much lower, but the profit margin is astronomical, often marked up by hundreds of %. Third, we look at the gastronomic business-to-business model. Here, your core customers are elite chefs and luxury hotels across Europe. You cultivate specific, highly prized sizes of capers, like the tiny non-peril, or you let them grow into large caper berries, known locally as caperones. The revenue structure relies on long-term, exclusive contracts. Chefs pay a premium for guaranteed quality, and the prestige of saying their ingredients are sourced from a specific Balearic estate. Finally, there is the agritourism model. This is where the business completely flips. In this model, the capers themselves are almost a loss leader. The real money comes from the experience economy. You generate revenue by hosting immersive farm tours, offering sunset culinary tasting experiences, and operating boutique, eco-friendly, rural accommodations. Wealthy tourists pay premium rates to stay on a working caper farm, wander through the picturesque fields, take aesthetically pleasing photos for social media, and buy your overpriced jars in the on-site gift shop. In this segment, you are essentially running a high-end hospitality business that just happens to have caper bushes as its background scenery. The margins here are incredibly lucrative, but it requires deep expertise in marketing and guest services. If you think buying a few acres of dirt and some seeds is enough to get started, you are wildly underestimating the hidden costs of island agriculture. Let us talk about the initial investments that outsiders completely overlook. First and foremost is the cost of land. You are not just buying agricultural space, you are buying prime Mediterranean real estate. Because of the massive influx of foreign wealth and luxury tourism, land prices in the Balearics are astronomical. You are competing for the exact same dirt that a billionaire wants for a summer villa. The capital required just to acquire a few hectares can easily run into the millions of dollars. Then, there is the silent killer: water infrastructure. The Balearic Islands suffer from chronic water scarcity, especially during the scorching summer months. While adult caper bushes are drought-resistant, establishing young plants requires a consistent, heavy water supply. If your land does not have an active, legally permitted well, you will have to truck in desalinated water at exorbitant prices. Setting up modern, hyper-efficient drip irrigation systems across rocky, uneven terrain will cost tens of thousands of dollars before a single plant is in the ground. Next, you must account for the waiting period. Caper bushes, known scientifically as Capparis spinosa, are notoriously slow to mature. They take 3 to 4 years to produce a commercially viable yield. That means you are looking at 36 to 48 months of sinking cash into soil maintenance, pruning, and fertilization with absolutely zero revenue coming back in. Finally, there is the cost of specialized labor. Capers cannot be harvested by machines. Every single bud must be hand-picked in the blistering heat of July and August. Because the islands have an extreme cost of living, driven up by the tourism economy, you cannot pay cheap agricultural wages. You have to pay premium seasonal rates, provide adequate housing for your workers, and manage complex local labor regulations. And because the caper plant has sharp thorns, the labor is physically grueling, leading to high worker turnover. If a picker quits mid-season, finding a replacement on an isolated island is nearly impossible. This creates a massive operational bottleneck that investors almost never see coming. This brings us to the core, counterintuitive insight of the industry. The defining truth that will make or break your entire operation. Let us call it the caper paradox. The caper is essentially a weed. It thrives in the harshest, driest conditions, growing naturally out of the cracks of ancient stone walls. Yet, making it commercially profitable requires the most expensive, delicate, and resource-heavy infrastructure imaginable. The paradox deepens when you look at how the product is valued. In this business, the smaller the product, the higher its perceived value, but the more it costs you to extract it. The tiny, tightly closed buds are the most coveted by chefs and command the highest prices. However, because they are so phenomenally small, it takes an agonizingly long time for a worker to pick enough of them to fill a single kilogram. Therefore, the harder you try to chase the luxury market by harvesting the smallest capers, the higher your labor costs skyrocket, pushing you dangerously close to bankruptcy. And here is another layer to that central paradox. Your biggest competitor in this business is not another caper farmer. Your biggest competitor is the real estate value of the dirt your bushes are planted on. Because the land is so valuable for tourism and luxury housing development, the opportunity cost of farming is astronomical. Every square meter of land you dedicate to a low-yield caper bush is a square meter you are not using for a highly profitable vacation rental or a swimming pool. Therefore, the caper must generate enough prestige and luxury value to justify its existence on some of the most expensive real estate in Europe. It is a plant that refuses to be industrialized, and the harder you try to scale it, the less profitable it becomes. To see this paradox in action, we only need to look at the historical caper collectives in the rural heartlands of Mallorca, specifically around the Lubai region. For decades, this area was famous for its caper production. But by the late 1990s and early 2000s, the industry was on the brink of total collapse. What happened? Globalization. The local farmers were trying to play the volume game. They were selling raw capers to mainland processors, trying to compete with massive agricultural operations in Morocco and Turkey. The North African farms had vast expanses of flat land, incredibly cheap labor, and heavy government subsidies. The Mallorcan farmers, trapped on an expensive island with high labor costs, were bleeding money. The collectives that survived did something completely counterintuitive. They stopped competing on price, and they stopped trying to produce more. Instead, they drastically reduced their output and leaned heavily into heritage branding. They formed cooperatives to achieve a protected geographical indication status. They stopped sending raw buds away and started curing them locally in traditional Mallorcan sea salt and artisanal vinegar. By pairing the capers with the romance of the island's history, they transformed a cheap commodity into a luxury culinary souvenir. They overhauled their packaging, shifting from generic bulk plastic containers to beautifully designed, heavy glass jars with rustic, minimalist labels that told the story of the island. They marketed the specific minerality of the Balearic soil and the salty sea breeze that flavors the capers naturally. They integrated their products into high-end gift boxes sold at airport duty-free shops and luxury boutiques. According to industry reports, these heritage brands are now selling a single, beautifully designed jar for 10 times the price of a standard supermarket equivalent. They realized that they could not win the agriculture game against industrial giants, so they started playing the luxury brand game, turning their geographical disadvantage into their most powerful marketing asset. In agriculture, no 2 years are ever the same. But on a Mediterranean island, the financial swing between a good year and a bad year is terrifyingly extreme. Let us imagine a favorable year. The island receives perfect, gentle spring rains, followed by a dry, hot summer. The microclimate remains perfectly stable. Your bushes yield heavy, dense clusters of tight, small buds. More importantly, the local tourism sector is booming, meaning seasonal workers have arrived on the island, and you manage to secure enough reliable hands for the July harvest. You pick efficiently, cure perfectly, and sell out your entire inventory of artisanal jars to high-end restaurants and wealthy tourists. In a scenario like this, your profit margins could soar to 30 or even 40% on direct sales. The agritourism side of your farm is fully booked, generating a massive secondary stream of pure cash flow. Now, let us look at a bad year. The variables that destroy you are completely out of your control. A severe heat wave strikes in late June, just weeks before the harvest. The sudden spike in temperature causes the caper buds to prematurely burst open and bloom into spectacular white and purple flowers. Once they flower, the bud is commercially ruined. In a matter of 48 hours, you could lose 60% of your crop. Furthermore, the island experiences a severe housing crisis. Landlords prefer to rent their apartments to tourists on short-term leases, rather than to seasonal agricultural workers. Because housing is too expensive, laborers simply do not come to the island. You have a field full of capers and no one to pick them. You watch your potential revenue literally wither on the vine. You still have to pay property taxes, irrigation maintenance, and marketing costs, but your revenue drops to near zero. A bad year does not just hurt. It can wipe out a decade of accumulated profits. Furthermore, if the tourism sector experiences a sudden downturn due to a broader economic recession, your high-margin direct-to-consumer sales and agritourism bookings will evaporate overnight. You will be left with a premium product that locals cannot afford, and tourists are not there to buy, forcing you to offload your harvest at massive discounts just to cover your immediate operating expenses. Ultimately, you are not farming a weed. You are bottling its brutal struggle against the Mediterranean sun, hoping the luxury market will pay a premium for the romance of a plant that refuses to be industrialized.